Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a tag video. This is the intimidating TBR tag, and I was tagged by Sean the Book Maniac. I will leave the link to his video. I think it's a tag that's been around for a couple of years, but because it's a sort of a TBR tag, you can do it at any time. That sort of thought suddenly struck me. The fact that Sean has tagged me 2 years after the event of the original is not a problem. It shows it's a long-lived tag, I suppose. Anyway, on with the questions. What book have you been unable to finish? Well, there's a couple that I'm going to talk about today, but actually I've got a dedicated video called My Unfinished Reads, where I look at about 8 to 10 books that I would have started reading about 10 years ago, and I ask the question, should I actually own up and say I'm never going to return to these? I'm going to do a Sean and bail on them, because I don't really bail on books. But I think leaving a book for 10 years is probably telling me something. So one of the books on that list, which wasn't 10 years ago, because I won the Man Booker 3 years ago, so it's only been out 3-4 years, was Marlon James, A Brief History of 7 Killings. I'm exactly halfway through it on page 300 of 330 of 688 pages, and it is an intimidating read in some ways, not least because it's ironic title of A Brief History, because quite clearly 688 pages is not brief. It's intimidating because some of it is written in sort of Jamaican patois, which isn't always easy to understand. There's a different character for every chapter, because it's a sort of polyphony of voices to build up a picture of contemporary Jamaica. But they weren't the reasons that stopped me reading, of being too intimidated. I don't know, I just found it wasn't sort of giving me anything new after about halfway, which may be very unfair. So there is a chance I might go back to this, but equally there's a chance I won't. And I didn't actually include this on my list of unfinished reads, because I'm going to go back to this. This is La Medusa by Vanessa. And again, it's quite intimidating. It's quite postmodern in its style. So you've got pages that look like that. What else have we got? Oh, we've got some algebra on that page. And I got to exactly page 100 of this, of 487 pages. And it was quite a tricky read, but it's the only book that Amazon has asked whether I want to sell it back because it has value. Although it doesn't have value in the sense of the whole cover should be this pink, but because it was sort of an ongoing read, even though I wasn't reading it. It was sort of lying on the bookshelf of my study, and when the sun got to it in the summer over various years, it's bleached the pink to grey. So I don't think it would have any resale value, Amazon. But I am determined to go back to this at some point, even though it is an intimidating read. Okay, question 2. What book have you yet to read because you haven't had the time? Well, I have had the time, because if I hadn't had the time to read a particular book, I wouldn't have had the time to read any books. But it's a special sort of quality of time I need to read this, The Tunnel, William H. Gass. Again, I'm on about page 142 of this, of 645 pages, so I don't know, a quarter of the way through or whatever. But it's a very intense read. I really need to concentrate. Now, I do most of my reading on the London Underground on my commute to and from work, and this book would not suit that. So I need a real quality block of time to do this. And because this year's been a bit mad with my own book coming out and stuff, I just haven't had that quality of time. So, again, I'm absolutely determined to get back to this. I'm just not sure when. What book have you yet to read because it's a sequel? Well, I don't do series, I don't do sequels. And I hope the great late Samuel Beckett won't be offended when I describe this as a trilogy, so not strictly a sequel. So this is his famous 3 books, which I think were all written in the course of a year, together with Waiting for Godot, which is an amazing achievement. And this is Malloy, which I've read, Malone Dies, and The Unnameable. And I've also got What. So they all sort of fall into that category. So last year I read Malloy and really enjoyed it, but felt, God, I need a break before I attack the next one, which is Malone Dies. that is a target for me to read this year, Malone Dies. And then next year I'll read The Unnameable, which I've heard a bit of on a show or on YouTube. And that's really sort of, you have to concentrate on that. Now, what I bought this year, because I saw a couple of documentaries on Beckett and this sounded great. And even though it precedes the trilogy, I feel that I have to keep going with the trilogy first before then going back to what? I just think it can be disruptive before reading Malone Dies, The Unnameable, to read what. So they're both sort of in my TBR pile. Beckett is intimidating, but I love his work so much, particularly his stage plays, that I don't feel intimidated by him, but I do need a break between each one. Okay, what book have you yet to read because it's brand new? Okay, well I don't have this, and it's not strictly brand new, so to tell you the story. So Ali Smith has written a quartet of books, each one named after one of the seasons. So I ordered Winter as the first one, but what I didn't realise is, because I'm a cheapskate, I sort of clicked on paperback without realising that it's not actually out until October this year. So that will be my brand new on my TBR pile. It's, a couple of months away yet. When I realised, so I went on to sort of track the package. One, I got this book, and then I realised that it hasn't been published in paperback. So I thought, well, I do want to read one of the Ali Smith in the quartet. So I bought Autumn and I read that. So I'm quite keen now to read Winter. So technically it's not brand new because obviously it's been out in hardback for a year. But it will be brand new, and I hope to get it the day of its paperback release. What book have you yet to read because you read a book by the same author and didn't enjoy it? Okay, well there's no clues to this book because it's a sort of second-hand, lost its dust cover book. But this is The Blood Oranges by John Hawkes. Now I've read two books by John Hawkes. One is called The Lime Twig, and then I read a book called Travesty. Now I read Travesty as part of my postmodern sort of target. I wanted to read a lot of sort of 60s American post novels, which I did between January and February, March, whatever, and I'll post the link to that. And Travesty was part of that. And The Lime Twig was a good book, but not an enjoyable book. And Travesty was not as good and even less enjoyable. So I've now read two books by Hawkes. Kind of appreciate what he does, but haven't enjoyed either of them, and that has put me off reading this one, but I will get to it. My enthusiasm for my postmodern mission died in February after I'd read several, even though it will contain probably one of my books of the year, which is David Martin's This Is Not a Novel, the trilogy. But anyway, so that's John Hawkes, Blood Oranges. What book have you yet to read because you're just not in the mood for it? Okay, Kent Haruf, Benediction. So Jason at Old Chapter and Verse was talking about this book. I cannot remember now in what context, which one of his videos. Apologies, Jason. You can comment and let me know, and then I can post a link to it. So most of last year, as a writer, I was writing lots of stories about death, the experience of death, which obviously we can never know. We can never know as people. We can never really, we can write about it, but you never know if you're even near the truth. So I'm always on the lookout for sort of books about death, and that's how this one cropped up. Jason says one of the best studies of, basically it seems to be about a man dying surrounded by his family, and it's a sort of a meditation on death as he slowly dies. But you've got to be in the mood for it. So even though I did a lot of writing about death last year, I would have been in the mood for this had I known about it last year. This year I'm feeling slightly more positive because of the reception to my book. Having said that, I do actually think this is going to be one of my next reads. So, but, I'll have to see what my mood's like. What book have you yet to read because it's humongous? Well, I've talked about this book before. The Recognitions by William Gaddis. Just under 1,000 pages. Now, coincidentally, I've just finished this tonight by the same author, Carpenter's Gothic. And it's the second Gaddis book I've read this year. The first was A Gape, which he wrote with a clock ticking down as he was dying. And it's an extraordinary book. It's a wonderful book. But I think I'm representative of his other four books for which he's known of which this and JR, which I think is the same size or similar size, are his two most sort of famous books, I guess. And apart from the size being intimidating, having read this, what Gaddis does in all of his books, other than Agape, is they're dialogue. They're virtually all dialogue. There's this sort of polyphony of voices. And, you know, it's quite an achievement. He does it amazingly well. It is a different experience reading a play script, which I've done a lot of because I used to write plays, so I've read a lot of play scripts. Now, this is definitely dialogue in a novel, not dialogue for actors. But, you know, this, and I assume this is not nearly as many voices in it as this is going to have, but there was an element of being concussed about the head by this. So having just finished this, contemplating this, which is the same style, which I like, but the sort of concussive nature of it is dreadfully intimidating. So it's not just the size, it's also the style. So I'm really not sure when I'm going to get to this one. What book have you yet to read because it was a cover buy that turned out to have poor reviews? Well, I don't buy books by cover buys, and if a book's got bad reviews, that wouldn't automatically rule it out for me. But I can't think of the last book I read that had bad reviews, and if I could, I wouldn't have known about them being bad ahead of time. I only really read reviews after I've read a book. So I can't really answer this question, except to say, as part of my postmodern sort of mission this year, I got this book by Robert Coover, but it arrived by the time I got fed up of my mission and had sort of stopped. But I think it has a beautiful cover. It's called The Public Burning by Robert Coover. And that's a representation of Richard Nixon on the front, because it is a sort of, it's about the Rosenberg trial and then being hanged for betraying secrets to Russia and all the polyphony of voices around that. Nixon is given voice in this book. So although I'd rather got off the whole postmodern thing, I'm keen to read this. It is also quite chunky, 530 odd pages. So it doesn't really answer the question because I haven't been put off by it. I haven't read any reviews, and I didn't buy it because of the cover. I didn't know what the cover was. It arrived, and I thought, well, that's a nice cover. So I've sort of mashed up that question. What book have you yet to read? Because no, this is a different question. What is the most intimidating book in your to be read pile? So I've got two for this. One is the obvious, The Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. Now, I'd always, when someone is touted as, being so sort of, what's the word? Important, significant, vital. Temperamentally, I always shy away from that. So I'd always steered clear of David Foster Wallace for no real good reason. And then I've read a book of his non-fiction on hip-hop in Boston. And then I read a book of his short stories. I now can't remember the title of The Girl with the Straw-Coloured Hair, something like that, which did very little for me. But I did a booktube video on authors who committed suicide. And obviously he came up in that. And as part of that, I was watching YouTube videos on Foster Wallace, but really people talking about him in the aftermath of his death. And I kind of was won over to at least try this, modern classic. But it is intimidating. It's, not counting the footnotes. Oh, I don't know, are they after every chapter? No. It's about 975 pages, 981 pages, yeah. So his reputation and the size of it is quite intimidating. I don't think I'm going to get to this year. And the other one is James Joyce's Ulysses. Now, I bought this when I was 18 with the intention of reading it pre-university. Clearly, I haven't done that. Just seeing when this edition was published. 82, I think, and it really smells of age. So, Joyce and Ulysses obviously is intimidating by reputation, but it's further become intimidating for me because my book has been described by two different critics as Joycean. Now, the only Joyce I've read is Portrait of the Artist. And I read that many years ago, and I can't really remember it. So I haven't read this. So if my work, well, first of all, it's intimidating that, you know, my work would be compared with this, because I can't believe that, you know, it's at the same level. So I might be intimidated by reading this, and then sort of thinking about my own work and thinking, oh God, how far short has it fallen? So there's a double whammy on this. A, it's intimidating by reputation, and B, because my book's been compared with it, I can only fail, really. So that's it. That is my intimidating TBR pile, tag. And Jason, Old Blues Chapter and Verse. I don't know if you have an intimidating TBR pile. I suspect not. I think you do everything with such equanimity and poise that you're not intimidated, and you just have a load of books to read. And Curtis, Books and Books, over to you, mate. I seem to remember, though, I think you said you don't sort of stack up books in advance. You sort of buy it as a sort of mood reader. So you might not have a TBR pile. So I might actually tag two people who don't have TBR piles, which is brilliant. But anyway, I'll throw it over to you guys, and you can either sort of you know, do it, or prove that actually I was right in my assumption that you don't have TBR piles. Okay, so thanks to Sean the Book Maniac for that tag. Until next time.